Discover the power of faith with Path of Faith, your source for spiritual growth and enlightenment in a world filled with uncertainty and doubt. Our life is always this equation of who we are with who we would like to be. Also, a little bit of who we used to be. It's not possible to conjugate the present moment without the combination of all of this. And the conjugation of the future, that time we're not even sure we'll have, depends on the wise articulation of the past we've had with the present we have today. It's this articulation that enables us to take steps, to walk, always believing that God's hand sustains us, but believing in the right way. Whenever I think of God's providence, I think of it as a favor that never ceases to be present in my life, but at the same time, never removes my possibility of doing my part. Because, my people, we have already learned, even psychology, pedagogy teach us that the good educator never gives his disciple the ready lesson. It would be a crime against the disciple to offer him the ready lesson. The master gives the certainty of his presence to remove any doubt, to be able to help, to dissolve what is hindering and harming learning. But at times, the disciple will have to live with his loneliness. The master remains silent and refuses to give the answer we so eagerly seek. Isn't that how life is? There are answers that only God can give us through his silence. That's also God's hand sustaining us. Because sometimes we have the illusion, and this is the result of naive vision. Unfortunately, religious discourse throughout our lives can give us naive visions that God will do everything for us, that God does this, that God does that. We have the right to believe in divine protection, but we are not relieved of the obligation to do our part, because it's a matter of wisdom, of maturity. The Father does this with the Son, the Mother does this with the Son. Love cannot make us think. The love that we know God has for us cannot make us think that He will do everything. I really like this expression. We only have the right to expect the impossible after we have done everything that was possible for us. So, yes, God protects us, but He also asks me to do my part in this protection. I pray to God for my life. I ask Him to give me health, but I need to do my part for that health to be a reality in my life, right? The care I have for myself is an expression of this part of mine, of the miracle I need to perform daily. So, sometimes I identify God's hand being present in my story, but not holding me as I think He does. Yes. Some forsakenness is too important in our human process. It would be very interesting if we learned this from the cradle, but unfortunately not, so it's never too late for us to learn. The unprotected feeling we sometimes feel in life is also God's hand, because those who love sometimes unprotect, so that you are exposed to what you need to live and experience alone. His presence always watching us, always guiding us, because that's very interesting. The more we grow, the more we mature in our experience with God, the greater our capacity to hear and understand His voice in our story. So, God protects me like this, even when He is distant. You know, it's not that He stays distant, it's that we feel that way because of life's situations. The context makes it difficult to perceive that intense presence in our lives. So, that moment of dismay, oh my God, it seems like I'm abandoned by the Lord. No, I'm not. This dismay is part of His protection in our life. Because those who love know very well that love also needs to go through the harsh experience of unprotectedness, because excess love unprotects. Isn't that how it works? When a person is excessively protected, in the end, in contrast to all of this, there is unprotectedness because that person cannot mature. So, they'll be forever naive, forever believing they are in a fairy tale, and life is not a fairy tale. So believing in God's protection doesn't give us the right to think that God will do everything for us, that He will walk for us. No. He will always be strengthening us ahead of these battles we are going to face, but we will be responsible for doing our part. It was like that with Moses. This song quotes Moses, right? It was this hand that helped Moses divide the sea in two. In this passage, there is a great richness that is in Exodus, when Moses is terrified because he took the people out of Egypt and went towards this promised land, promised. You see, it's also a bit protected. The promised land would be reached as a promise that God made to Moses as long as he encouraged himself to take that people out of slavery and cross the difficulties of the desert. You see, anyone who has had the opportunity to go to Israel knows very well what the desert is. You enter that desert to reach a place we don't know where it is, which is only in the heart of a man. As a promise, it's a great difficulty. And the people believed, followed Moses, began to experience the restrictions of the desert, hunger, began to miss the onions, because in Egypt they ate onions. In the time of slavery, onions were the main food. That's why sometimes we use the expression, "Don't keep crying over the onions of Egypt," isn't it? You must have heard that expression when someone advises you to stop lamenting the past. What is lamenting the onions of Egypt? It's saying, "Oh, I was a slave, but I had this food, I had onions to eat, and now I'm free, but I have nothing." Hold on. Give the desert time. Let the desert tell you what it needs to say. Even hunger, restriction, is very important in the human process. We identify all the time that people are spoiled because they lacked nothing. It's terrible when you have a child who has been pampered since childhood, lacked absolutely nothing, and suddenly, in the open field of life, suddenly that person needs to face life's desert, and they don't have enough ammunition to handle it. What do? How do we face the desert? At that moment, when Moses took the people out of slavery and encouraged himself to lead this people through the desert towards the promised land, he also felt fear. He also didn't know what it would be like. That's why, throughout the manifestations of God in that moment of Moses' life, he communicates with God. They are epiphanies, which are these glorious manifestations of God there through simple reality. It's the burning bush, it's the stone that gushes water. Anyway, God talks to Moses, gives him signs that he is on the right path, but doesn't shield him from the unprotectedness that the desert causes him. So unprotected in that desert, materially speaking, he can establish a trust in God that no other comfort had given. You see how interesting it is? How the unprotectedness, the apparent unprotectedness, has a whole reserved care. And behind the scenes there, just like you, who are a father, a mother, create a restriction for your child so that they can mature, isn't it? Sometimes you take something away from your child so that they really feel the lack, so that later they can appreciate it. I repeat, many people go wrong in life because they lack nothing. Then you notice that when there is too much lack, it can also cause an imbalance, a lack of trust in life, in people. Anyway, it's balance that works. When you start educating by providing protection and apparent unprotectedness, where that person will have to face the situation alone, even if you're watching from afar. I faced extremely difficult situations in my life, where it wasn't enough for the other to say, "I'm here." Why? Because they were mine. Even help. Looking to the side, knowing that you have a friend with you, that there is a mother, a father, a brother. But in many moments of our lives, this ordeal is to be lived in solitude. It's when I need to experience this feeling of being unprotected. Just like Moses experienced stepping on the discomforts of the desert. By facing those discomforts, he understood what the human condition is. So I also make this experience. You do. I don't want to spend my life in blissful clouds. I really don't. And that's why, since I was very young, when life was difficult for me, I found something in that discomfort that made me think higher, that made me think beyond. Moses, experiencing the discomfort of the desert, needed to convince those who were with him that that discomfort would be worth it. Oh, but some wanted to go back to slavery. Look how human weakness is very present in our lives at times of discomfort. How many people, let me give you a simple example so you understand. There are people who need to break up with relationships that are terrible, disastrous. That person only brings harm to you, you know that. But you have a bond with them, you have an emotional need, you can't break up with that relationship. So, suddenly you encourage yourself, everything becomes clear to you. This person doesn't do me good. I can't marry this person, because if in the time of dating, it's already like this, imagine in my marriage, later in my married life, it will become an even worse hell than it already is. Then you encourage yourself. You're motivated by people around you to break up. Then it's terrible on the day you break up. The suffering is cruel inside you. It seems like you'll never recover, that you only think about that person. Why? Because despite them causing you so much harm, you have a sick little bond with them of emotional dependency. You know they harm you, but you don't know how to live without them. Then you start taking steps. The first week is horrible. You suffer, you cry, you can't listen to the music, you can't smell, you can't see that little thing that they forgot there at your house. All of that is terrible. But suddenly you start taking steps towards liberation. It's as if you were walking towards a place that will only do you good. And a month later, that suffering gets better. 2 months later, that suffering gets better, and suddenly you're not even remembering anymore. Of course, there's still a silent bond there, being dismantled, because emotional dependency, it doesn't die overnight. It's like suffocating a cancer cell with chemotherapy, where you're removing the life from the cancer cell, which is the cell that kills us. Then let's say 3 months later, you meet that person again, and you have that famous relapse. There you go. The castle you were building, the ground you had walked, which had been so difficult, you throw away, and you go back to Egypt. You go back to slavery. You do the same thing that Moses' companions wanted to do, go back to eating the onions, go back to eating the rotten, spoiled food. Then you restart that relationship because it's sick, and you didn't maintain the necessary distance you should have kept. Because when you have that emotional dependency, you have to establish distance, because otherwise you won't heal. You have to stop wanting to know about that person's life, because otherwise you won't heal. You need to stop snooping on their Facebook, because otherwise you won't heal. You need to stop investigating their life. Where were they? What were they doing? You have to cease all points that may make you want to go back to Egypt, because otherwise you'll never be free. Then, 3 months later, you're beautiful and splendid already, killing the cancerous cell. You go give a few more kisses, go back to that horrible dependency, and hell returns to your life. In your first week, it's okay that everything is coming back. Soon, my daughter, you're in a worse hell than you were 3 months ago. That's how it is. When we don't know how to live the discomfort that builds us up, we sabotage ourselves all the time. It's like stopping drinking, stopping smoking. You stop smoking for a year, and you celebrate because you stop putting that carcinogenic toxin in your body, and suddenly you go there and light up a cigarette for no reason, and that addiction comes back as if it were a monster, capable of eating you whole. There you go. All that sacrifice you made in the first days without smoking goes down the drain. Why? All that sacrifice goes down the drain. Why? Because you weren't able to live with the discomfort of renunciation. My people, it's amazing how God's hand assists us like this, making us aware of what we need to break in our lives. These are situations that we need to establish boundaries for, because otherwise, we will never be healed. We will be forever sick in the line of the needy, crying and begging for a little bread of kindness from others, a little bread of affection from others. For God's sake, we were not made for this. We were not made to drag emotionally dependent people around. We were made to love. And love only makes sense in our lives if it builds us up, if it helps us go through the discomfort of the desert. Otherwise, it makes no sense. This pseudo-love, this false love that sometimes we say we feel for each other, that doesn't help us in the discomfort of the desert. I need to live through my deserts. You need to live through yours. And true friends are those who recognize the deserts the other needs to go through and say, that's right. Let's go through this desert because you need it. Now, Apollonia, she's that happy, orderly life. Remember that character? Apollonia, where everything was a game of being content, right? Stop it. Kill that childish instinct that exists within you that makes you afraid of life's discomforts. Life's discomfort is when the well-lived only makes us better. Take off that victim mask that you stick on your face so others will eternally pity you. You're just wasting time in life like this. What nonsense. God holds our hand for us to be able to cross this desert. It's not to keep falling back and going back to eating the onions of Egypt because we felt sorry for ourselves, because we felt sorry for the other. No. The journey is forward. And there comes a moment when Moses stands before God and says, now you solve this situation because I don't know what else to do. They've already built a golden calf in the middle of the road. They've already caused trouble. They're already worshiping other things. So they're not even remembering that the Lord exists. They only don't go back because they're too far away. But they return in another way. They don't return geographically because they were already far from Egypt. They would die on the way. But they didn't return geographically, but they returned emotionally. Because sometimes we've already surpassed the territory of our physical slavery. I've already left prison, but the prison hasn't left me. That's how it works. I've already taken steps towards my freedom, but I haven't achieved my freedom. I haven't decreed the conquest of my freedom. So I remain emotionally attached to my past. It's been a pleasure having you with us on Path of Faith. We value your feedback, so please share your thoughts in the comments, give us a thumbs up, share this video with others, and hit the subscribe button to stay connected with us.